live.
Oh, I wasn't ready.
Hello, everybody. This is a reunion of the Secret of Light Walter Russell group. We had a little hiatus, did some journeys into the occult and into spiritual sovereignty. And now we are back to tackle Walter Russell, The Secret of Light, Part 2, Omnipotence. This is Will Harold from Akashic Intelligence, the original AI. We are coming from our new home in the Rogue River at a place I like to call New Rivendell. So we are here and we are going to start this discussion. And as some of you may know, we've already covered the complete first part in some of our other videos, and that's in a playlist actually on the Akashic Intelligence website that you can go to and watch the entire first part of The Secret of Light. This group is now going to discuss the second part, and the first part was Omniscience, and this is Omnipotence. And we will start now with a quote from Walter Russell himself. This is on one of the first pages of part 2. And it says, "Know thou, therefore, that time is not, nor are there moving things which change, nor is there life, nor death, nor cold, nor heat, nor good, nor bad, in my universe of me." And that's from Walter Russell from the Divine Iliad. Does anyone have any comments or questions regarding this statement, which basically says all is nothing?
Pretty much says it all.
For me, it was encouraging. It's like universe of me, meaning immortal. It also means all this is gone. So I don't know. I just find it encouraging. That's all when I see that. But that's just me.
It's very similar to some of what the Buddhists teach in Maya. That it's all an illusion. Everything's an illusion. When read, it like you said, it is comforting, but in practice, much more difficult, right? To be in a situation and say, "Oh, it's just an illusion, all is nothing," as a train hits you, is a difficult scenario to comprehend, and we're going to get a little bit into that as we talk a bit more. So what I've done too is I've changed the format a bit to where I've actually put the questions on. Okay, there you go. So, okay, so the first question is, what are the 4 elements required for the one mind to have a measured space for its stage, setting, and screen for its light projection? And from the answer is motion, time, change, and sequence. And as you may recall, the number one thing that Walter Russell wanted to convey in his home study course was 1, that there was one source of mind, and 2, that the world that we experience is a cinematic projection, and nothing is as we believe it to be or real. So when he talks about his stage setting and screen for its light projection, he's referring back to that idea that what we see is really like Plato's cave with the shadows, where we're just seeing a projection, a virtual reality, if you would like, shown upon a screen, and it has no reality. So with that, I brought up this diagram that we've reviewed in the past, but it may be a little clearer now in some aspects, that within this, and again, this is talking about an electric current, and we're going to talk a little bit about electric current in a bit, because Walter Russell compares you have God's mind and then you have God's thinking. So God's mind is the one. The mind is the one, the whole, the uninterrupted. There is nothing but the one. From that one comes two. Once it becomes two, it becomes electric because now it has two poles. It has both a female and male pole. So God's thinking is electric. His mind is not. His mind is a magnetic one hole. Once it goes from the magnetic into thinking, it becomes electric and goes into two poles. So that's one reason I brought this up, because we talk about the construction of the one cycle of electric current. And then you see on the bottom portion of this, it says this mind and motion universe. So within this diagram, we see that we have potential. We have the two poles out here, both A and A, which then meet in the middle here. You have heat coming in and then cold and heat, cold, and so on. And then with this diagram just below it here, we also have the exact same diagram, but from a color perspective, a gas perspective, and a note perspective, and how all of these correlate. So that should be that red would correlate with barium or beryllium, and also with the note Me. And so on. Green would be nitrogen and Fa. So within Walter Russell's, I guess you'd call it cosmology or theory of life or theory of matter, he has these correlations occurring. That gases, colors, and notes have direct corollary to the magnetic white light on both sides. So again, this magnetic white light is the one. And we're going to get back to my original diagram that I did last study and look at that a bit more. But for right now, just envision God's mind. Okay, this is his mind, not his thinking, is magnetic, is one whole. That then, expands into the many once God begins to think. Because once he thinks, it goes into polarity, it goes into male, female, father, mother, and then becomes many. Any questions on that?
When I think of the colors below
Mm-hmm.
and the projection, I guess, I'm thinking of our eyes, you know,
Yes.
and the fact that we're only seeing a certain spectrum. But anyway, it's what you just said, the 1 to 2 and then to the many. So.
And again, as we talked about earlier, we talked a little bit about the red shift, blue shift, right? And so as we get out here on the ends, we get the reds and the blues. So we get the red violet over here on this side, we get the blue violet, right? Which actually goes out into, red, blue here, right? And violet out here. So when you have the red, the yellow, and the blue, those are the primary colors. And those make up all the colors. You mix those colors to get all the other colors. Mm-hmm. So that's why maybe yellow's in the middle, which is also the carbon, right? We are carbon-based beings. And so it is. It is so, right? That is the note, so, in the center. So carbon, yellow, and so.
I'm remembering something I just heard the other day. Someone talking about music theory, and the chord built on the fifth of the scale always wants to resolve.
And we're going to talk a bit about that. I don't know if I think it's going to be our next discussion when we talk about balance. And what that talks about is that we as humans always want to resolve. We want to find balance, but we never can because we are two. And we only find balance once we find source. But that tension is what provides us motion. And this is the motion that we see here.
but then we initially learned that motion, time, change, and sequence are nothing.
Mhm. And then once we resolve or die or go into source, it all resolves and becomes one again.
Okay.
That's when we get resolution. That's when we get resolved.
This
Once we reach.
is mind blowing, as it were.
So I put together this little collage for the question 2. And again, what are the 2 supreme illusions man must solve to fathom the secret of light? And the answer is, from the book, the illusion of the universe itself and the illusion of man himself. So what we're saying here is, I think Giselle was talking about it a little earlier, is as we look out through our eyes, which is really how it's kind of like, water will seek its easiest path to flow. I think oftentimes humans will seek the easiest path to understand. And the easiest path is our eyes, right? What we see. But as we know from magic tricks and magicians, that we can, sleight of hand can actually show us things that aren't really there. And as we look out on the world through our eyes, we are the ones who control what we see and what we create. And there's a lot of factors that influence what we see and create. It can be from our heredity, it can be from things we've heard, said, our past experiences. But what we create is an illusion, and it is created from what is in our mind and in all of our subtle bodies. We rely on our physical bodies because it is the easiest path to take, because to actually explore our subtle bodies takes a lot of work. It takes meditation, a lot of inner work, a lot of inner growth, a lot of time. And for most of us, we don't have it. When we're younger and busy, we're almost too immature to really, have discipline to sit down and meditate, nor is it probably the time. It's more of a time of exploring the world when we're younger. But it would be a time maybe to get disciplines and get the discipline of knowing that there is an inner life also. And then once we get into our adolescence, we become busy with work and other things. And then as we get into our early adulthood, we have children and jobs. And it's not really until maybe we get a little older and get through most of life's journeys that we have time to actually look back and meditate and spend that time. But once we develop those subtle bodies and the senses of those subtle bodies, the illusion begins to disappear a bit. But this is, from what Walter Russell says, one of the hardest things for man to comprehend. Is the illusion of the universe and the illusion of man himself. Any comments?
There sure is a lot of sites, that spend a lot of time about what we see out there, be it sphere or other ideas. So instead of focusing on, anyway, I'm just saying that they're sure, if you just look on the surface, we could argue a lot on it, for sure.
And that was some of these, images I threw up here, right, that I just pulled off, the internet, putting in, illusion, right? I don't know if anybody remembers this, the Styx album, The Grand Illusion, that came out. This is from that album cover. This is a Salvador Dali painting. I don't know if anybody's ever looked at any Salvador Dali. And then this, kind of shows that the universe is coding, right? That it's a code that's running through and creating the illusion.
Wow.
And kind of the same thing here with time and all this stuff kind of, merging. And this reminded me a lot of the Walter Russell diagram of the wave. But it's, somewhat all of an illusion. And, which path we decide that, it's spirit, or it's, a code that is in our DNA and similar to computers, or it's, our own making. From what Russell says, it would be all of our own making, right? So we control all of what we see and do. So before I leave this slide and go to question 3, is there any other comments? All right, let me go to the next question. So how do sensations of the body differ from the sensations of the other subtle bodies or planes of existence? And as I was going through, this is a question, kind of a new question. It wasn't on what I gave you, but as I was going through some of my other discussion presentations, this diagram came up, which is a Walter Russell. So this is a mind-centered thought ring of motion, which pertains back to what we were talking about with motion and sequence and so on. And so within the body, within the physical body, we have sensations. We have feel, touch, hearing, sight, taste, right? And from those, we actually can create these other sensations of concepts and balance and instinct and intuition and rhythm and inner vision. But do all these come from the body of sensation? Because they all flow from the mind, right? They go out to these other rings, which is our other subtle bodies, and then end up out here on the outer ring, which is the body itself. So many of these are not part of our, do you feel love? Well, yeah. Do you feel it in your body? Is love tangible? Let me say, oh yeah, I have a heart rhythm that goes up, right? I have, certain sensations of love, but for most people, I would think they would say that love is not a tangible feeling. It's something that I feel or I experience in my mind or in my soul, but I don't actually experience it in my body. Same thing with things like inspiration and instinct and intuition. So things within this inner circle, beauty, these are things that are not tangible, but are parts of our other bodies. And if we don't develop these other bodies, we don't develop the understanding and the acknowledgement of these sensations outside of our physical sensations, we will be ruled by these physical sensations, and they will become our reality. And we forsake these things in the middle for the feeding of the sensation, or what we would call in some circles scientific materialism, which is out here, which is just quantity, not quality, but quantity. Any comments on what I just said about that?
Just wow.
And I think that we are experiencing a lot of this in our world today. A lot of the issues that we have in our current environment are very much out here, right? They're on this outer realm. We're afraid of dying. We're afraid of contracting something that's in the physical realm, when actually it may be the cause, right? May be in this inner realm, maybe in an astral or a mental state. I know that some people know that Grant exposed me to the idea of the Wetiko virus, which comes from native culture as an idea of that within us we have this darkness, right? And actually, Jung talks about it also as a shadow. And in our inability to actually grasp our shadow, which may be our fear of dying, right, which is part of actually a shadow aspect, which may be our fear of losing others, our fear of loneliness. All these things can make up this shadow side of us, this fear, which is the Wetiko, which the Native Americans said it was actually what the Europeans brought over when they came. They couldn't understand them because they had this kind of insatiable lust for fear and greed and things that were outside of the qualities that they and that they adhere to, that they acknowledge them. And oftentimes maybe we don't acknowledge that we all have those things within us. We're all, drunks and thieves and murderers, we all have that ability. Whether or not we act on it's a different story, but whether or not we acknowledge it's a whole different issue either, and embrace it and say, yes, that is part of me. I don't choose it, but it is part of me. So within that and within those sensations that we may ignore and just rely on this outer, this could be, what we're experiencing today, is this too much relying on this fear, on this Wetiko, on this concepts of my physical body only, and forsaking all the inner.
Is that like the etheric body that you're talking about, the other side?
Well, we're going to get into a little bit of the subtle bodies and the different ones. There's more than just the etheric. There's the mental, there's the spiritual. There's actually seven what we call planes of existence or consciousnesses. I mean, they're all handled a bit differently, and depending on who you look at, they can have different names within, like, say, within Steiner's work or within Blavatsky's work. They may even differ a little bit. Then you get into, like the Ayurvedic, the Indian cultures, so the Indian, ideas of those bodies. Even within biogeometry, which is very much taken from some theosophy and Rosicrucianism.
Like Masons, no? Isn't it from Masons?
Well, again, the acknowledgement of Masons, which is also, was a secret occult society. I don't think that there was any society prior to, say, the Christian church, which, we're talking probably about 400 AD, right? Because I think that the original Christians and even the Hebrews with the Kabbalah, where they acknowledge these subtle bodies also. But the Christians kind of broke it down just to three, right? Which was body, soul, spirit. Before that, there were the seven.
Wasn't it seven, including the five senses, or are you talking about unrelated to that? Because they also say there's seven senses.
Well, the five senses only really pertain to the physical body, because that's where they come from. They don't come from the subtle bodies. And what I'm trying to explain is that we rely on the one body, which is the physical body, and the five physical senses for our entire relationship with our world and with others. When we actually have this whole plethora of bodies and sensing that we don't develop, because we are so caught into the, we could call the ego or the self, which once our physical senses begin, this is what Russell talked about, as we talked about in the part one, is that our electric mind, our sensing mind that we take for ourselves, which is nothing more really than our egoic fascination with trying to get as much as we can to fill our senses, our five senses. We eat food, no, we want gluttony, right? We want, love, no, we want lust and porn. I mean, we have to get more and more to fill these senses because we have such a void in the other bodies and senses, in my opinion.
It was funny because I think it was Hall, one of them, between 2 months and 6 months or something, the baby's head is in all lumps and she's still connected with, about that. Right?
Yeah. And
wild stuff. I never heard that one.
Well, and again, this, when we get back to just physical materialism and the body, we forsake all these other bodies, we forsake all other connections, we forsake any connections to planetary systems that we know have influence on us. I mean, there's a reason that we've had astrological charts since the beginning and that all civilizations have them. Yep. And for some reason we say, oh, well, that's all, hoo-hoo, doesn't mean anything now. And, it's all about, and look at the situation we're in. I mean, it's kind of funny. When I used to do a lot of business consulting for companies that were failing, they'd call me in, they'd say, well, we want to be successful, but we want to keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't you understand the reason you're failing is because you're doing what you're doing. You know, they don't want to change. They just want to know how to become successful, right?
Yeah.
I have an IT customer that's been losing money. He cries for 20 years. So people, you know, so we tell them, because we're moving them. So we tell them, well, you got to change this and this and this. No. He said, man, you've been losing money for 20 years. You think maybe you should listen to somebody else for a while? Why do you even stay open? But like, just why do you even have the company? I think it's because they are so much that company, whether it makes money.
They're so much, that's their ego, right? It's their physical. That's
and they have enough money to live, obviously.
Yeah. And same with us. And we will continue to live in this state, right, until it kills us. And right now it's killing us, right? We're killing the planet. Humans are killing the planet. We're killing our bodies. We're taking in poisons. We're giving more poisons.
Yep.
You know? We're poisoning our rivers, our air. Huh? Excuse me?
The earth is healing, and we're going to have to move with it or stay in this dimension. And the new earth is coming.
Exactly. The new earth is coming. And this is, you know, this is, as if you look back into esoterica, you know, into histories of the past, the earth has gone through many, you know, incarnations, reincarnations. I mean, it's moved through it, just as our bodies have moved through. And that was when we, within the series that we did upon, you know, occult, you know, spirituality and spiritual sovereignty, those are some of the topics that I tried to touch on, is that within Blavatsky and within Steiner, the human body has morphed with the earth and with the other planets also, and gone through different incarnations. And if you ever listen to Gigi Young, she has some really good episodes on the different bodies with the earth and the different incarnations. And right now, you know, it's being said that we're moving into a new incarnation. Walter Russell is also stating the same fact.
But
stating the fact that we are. Go ahead.
I heard a thing from Dorothy Cannon. I only saw it this morning. Do you know Dorothy Cannon?
No, I do not know.
It was the past lives thing, and like, you know, you've heard of her. Anyway, she's supposed to be a really high source in this. She says that the Earth itself, a planet, is doing something on its own, something that's never been done before, and the whole universe is watching because the Earth itself is going to do this move because it's dying if it doesn't. And then and whoever can come along with it will go to the new Earth. But then it's something about it's special because it's doing it by itself is what she was yelling about.
Well, and that gets back, you know, which Walter Russell really doesn't cover, but he does talk about, you know, planets disintegrating, and it's the wave, right? The wave is moving, and it's going through, and everything that in the universe goes through this waves, through this, you know, concentration and degradation, right? And we're going to talk about that a bit later. But the idea is that we are all one. We are part of the earth. We are organisms upon the earth and the earth is changing. It's evolving. And because that's what's the number one universal law that we learned during the esoteric thing was the law of evolution, right? Everything is in a constant state of change, and so is the earth. And those that choose to evolve with that will ascend. Those who do not will descend, because there is no stasis.
And she was saying, like, they'll stay and they'll eventually get there, but they'll take them much longer.
Well, they'll stay on a degenerated earth.
Yeah.
Because again, if we follow Russell, which is discussions about,
right,
the wave is constantly in motion, right? What are the four things, right? It's constantly in motion. Movement and time are things that we see. So if you're not ascending, you are descending. There is no stasis. Just in a company, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Right?
Yeah, I wasn't seeing it a minute ago, but I do now.
Right? So again,
it's going to get worse if those that don't move forward.
Worse and better again. If we go back to Russell, but we started with there is no good, there is no bad, right?
Good point.
They're just different.
Yeah.
And so they're going to descend deeper into matter. And what that would mean is that they become much more dense, much more physical, right? And they become much more sensed. That they become a prisoner of their sensing body. Now, there's some who think that that's ascension, right? A materialist, a scientific materialist, would think that I want to be a robot, right? I want to have skin that is not supple but is metallic, right? Because I can't be hurt by an object if my skin's metallic or my
transhumanism.
Yeah, exactly. But so what I'm saying is, there are some who will think that that's better. That is not where the Earth is going. That's a different path. That's not an organic path. That's a transhumanist path. So those,
Move them all.
so those,
They'll have to move to Mars.
yeah, they'll have to move somewhere. But from what Steiner says, and this gets into, again, whether or not there's a thing called the eighth sphere, which is where some will go within this transhumanistic path, or we go to our next incarnation, which, as Walter Russell said, and we talked about in some of the last discussions on part 1, to Venus. And that is where Walter Russell says our next incarnation is. It's within the planet Venus, and that's where the Earth is going to move to. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But for this right now, it's really is trying to make us aware that we do not want to become slaves of our sensitive body, nor do we want to become slaves as our only source of news and input. It'd be like only watching one channel on news and thinking that channel is the end all for all enlightenment.
Well, they're all the same, so that's a bad example.
Well, there are other areas to go besides news channels, right? So
news though.
Yeah. And so what Walter Russell would say, or what Steiner would say, is that's why we would have to go to the inner self, to the intuition, and to commune with Source in order to find out and develop these other bodies. So any more comment on that before I move on to the next? All right, I'm going to move on here. So question number 3, what eyes, ears, and senses must man develop to know his relationship to the universe and himself? And Walter Russell states, man must develop the senses of the spirit and forgo the senses of the body. It's not an easy thing to believe that the universe has no existence. So when you were asking earlier, Doug, what are the levels of consciousness or the planes of existence? I mean, for this diagram, we have the physical, etheric, and dense body all coupled into one, which is the double vehicle of prana or chi, physical, liquid, and gaseous. And then the next one would be emotion, the seat of feelings. Then we'd have the lower mental, which is concrete thinking with forms. Those forms gets back into Neoplatonism, where Plato talked of forms, which could also be seen as archetypes. Forms and archetypes can be interchangeable for some. And then we get abstract thinking, which is formless, where we're really just dealing with concepts that really don't have form, that may be higher ideals. And then we get into the spiritual, which was the seed of spiritual and true intuition, where illumination and enlightenment occurs, which is the Buddhi. And then we get to the highest, which would be the spark of the divine, the true self within, the spirit or the Atma. So if you can see this other diagram here, which is actually a Steiner diagram, hopefully it's large enough so most people can see it, because it is rather enlightening, I think. So down here is, he would call the physical body, and he takes the physical and the etheric and breaks them up into two, because one's emotional and one's just the physical. But then he would have what we call the astral body, which, here they're calling it the lower mental and higher mental. And then you get into the lower self, and you get to self, which is kind of your ego ID and who you are. And then you move up into the spiritual self, the life spirit, and then the spiritual man, the Atma again. So, there's lots of different concepts. I would say that this one on the right is much more the idea of biogeometry and Ibrahim Karim. So if anyone's into biogeometry, when you deal with, and I showed Grant some of this when he came by this weekend, and we worked with the archetypal ruler, these are kind of the planes of existence that are developed within biogeometry. And for me, when I first started doing it, a lot of my issues were in the mental plane. And from what Ibrahim Karim says, that's where most of our issues are within overthinking, right? Overthinking things with our mental traumas. But when you look at Steiner's, which is very interesting here, is, he has the physical, which is the body, right? Then he has the etheric over here, and then he has the soul. But then he has this line that runs through of the thinking, right? Can you see this, like, yellow brick road thing, this hatched area, which he has on here is thinking. So within the physical and, this lower levels, it's very large, right? And it dissipates as it gets to self. And then it turns, into this higher knowing here of love and force from source, right? So within here, we have the thinking, right? Up here, we have the feeling. And then up here, we have the willing. So within Steiner, he talks a lot about thinking, feeling, and willing. And so up in here is where we have spirit. And so man must develop the senses of the spirit and forgo the senses of the body, right? So as we begin to get into this, of the spirit, from here up, basically, is the body of the spirit that we must develop within within Russell's description of what man must develop to actually know his relationship to the universe and himself.
Which one is Russell? The number 3 down?
Russell's stating, this is what Russell's stating. Russell doesn't really have a diagram on this. Most of his diagrams are electric, and he doesn't really.
This was Steiner, though, no?
Well, again, what I'm saying is this is what Steiner is talking about. So Steiner actually has a diagram of the subtle bodies.
Okay, this is Russell's body.
It's Russell's question, and I'm using Steiner to show
Okay.
what Russell is saying, because Russell doesn't really have any diagrams himself of these things.
I got you.
Because Russell doesn't really believe in subtle bodies. I mean, Russell, within his cosmology, doesn't explain subtle bodies, right? He says you're either conscious or you're not. He doesn't go through that you have different levels of consciousness. So he would never say, if you remember when I went into all those discussions earlier on part 1, where we talked about Jung and Freud and consciousness and Mesmer and what's unconscious, what is subconscious. Remember that? I don't know if you guys
vaguely. And
the reason that I went into that was because Russell has, in his cosmology, he only has conscious, and there is no unconscious. There's unaware, and there's consciousness. And to have that view, you're throwing out, a millennium of a study of the subtle bodies and the different levels of consciousness. Because these different levels of consciousness receive different signals. And all he's saying is you have the body and you have consciousness, which is true in a sense, but within those, there is different aspects that are developed. So within this etheric body, this is where you have your feeling, right? You don't have feeling up here in these spiritual realms. You have that within this body realm. It's often said that angels, and I don't know how true it is, but angels don't have like the conscious in a sense that they know why they do what they do. They just do it because that's what God says. It's not like they have, that this is bad, this is good. They just do it. That's what God has told them to do. They do it. So for us to have this mind that knows both good and evil and kind of decides on what it is, what we do, it's a higher consciousness in a sense. So we as humans have to balance these subtle bodies. And this is what makes us human, which is these subtle bodies. And each has a purpose, and each is developed, and each has corresponding planets, and each is affected by the universe. And once we begin, and this is what Russell's trying to get at, even though, like I said, I don't really think he explains it that well in his book, right? He's at a different level of just, here's the wave, electric, here's the polarities. We don't get into a lot of this, and I think that's some things that make the secret of life hard to understand. Because once we begin to understand that we do have these subtle bodies, and when he's saying, man must develop these other bodies, right, and forgo the senses of the body. Okay, well, if we do that, what are we doing then? What are we relying on? What are we becoming, right? What are we developing? If we forgo these things, what then? What next? We begin to develop these other aspects of ourselves, right? The spirit, the willing, because he talks about desire, but he doesn't really say where desire comes from. It comes from God, but where is it within my physical body? Where is it within my being? And that's why I think to break it down and actually say, here's some concepts that have been thrown out there. This one by Steiner. I said this one's more of a biogeometry, maybe the divine one, the law of one, I guess, two ideas over here. To actually begin to say, okay, here's what I'm developing. Here is what my goal is, to ascend through these planes and to actually develop these bodies so that I will have the spiritual awareness and spiritual sensing.
I have a question.
Okay.
So I don't know if this was said, but I noticed like all the different levels of consciousness kind of correspond with the different like chakras.
Correct.
And I would also assume that with that being said, that's the way you access those planes of existence. It's through those mind centers.
Well, it is one way. When you get into some of the higher work that I've seen, again, I'm no expert, that the body itself is not the best mechanism to access these. So to rely on the chakras is really a body prototype, right? They occur in these certain areas.
Well, they represent a subtle body, right? And within the chakras, you have different.
They represent the access points within the human body, right? For the chakras to be seen, you have the body type, and you see the lower chakra, the root chakra, the heart chakra, the third eye. I mean, all those chakras actually relate to the human body. What I would say is that those chakras are actually part of the subtle bodies. We access them through the human body, but once the human body is no longer, are those chakras still there? And the answer would be yes.
Yeah.
So the body is more of a mapping device for the chakras, not necessarily an access.
Well, I guess it's framed weird. But yeah, the chakras exist on different subtle bodies. Like we have not just the etheric body, we have
and
the
then
cathedral body.
Yeah, and then the chakras will dissipate as we move up in body type and become one. So as you move through your subtle bodies, they begin to merge more and don't have definite locations like you see in the physical body. So when you're in your physical body, when you're dealing with physical reality, the chakras are mapped to the human body. As you begin to expand inner and begin to expand your other bodies, chakras begin to merge and become much less divine and defined and merge into a one. a oneness. So in the physical plane, the chakras are mapped to the human body and have access. But you can access chakras in your higher planes without a physical body, because the physical body is not existent. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, I have more chakra questions, but we're not really talking about chakras, so we can move on.
Yeah, and I can send you another diagram on some of the mapping of the chakras in the higher bodies. It's a bit different. All right. So hopefully I didn't confuse people on this, and that you understand that these are actually, different diagrams. Here's Russell's statement. He has no diagrams. This is Steiner's diagram that correlates to Russell's statement. And this is another diagram that correlates to Russell's statement. Okay. And so as I was doing this, it says that man must develop the sense of the spirit, forgo the sense of the body. One thing that this kind of reminded me of was when Jesus walks on the water in the Bible. And what this is, in case people don't know the story, is that Jesus actually, and I'll just read it here because I took it right out of the Bible. So shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them. These are the disciples, and they're in a boat that they just left one of his lectures or one of his gatherings. And he went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, and this is Peter here, who's the rock of Jesus, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" So here we have Jesus, who is going against all the laws of our senses, right? All the laws of nature. If we walk on water, we're going to sink. There's all kinds of storms. They're going to blow us over. We're going to die, right? The disciples, who have been following Jesus for months now, are all afraid in the boat. And then here comes Jesus walking across the water. "Hey, what's going on, guys? What's up?" Right? And Peter's like, "Wow, you can do this? You can really do this. You can walk on water?" He says, "Call to me." Well, so Jesus says, "Sure, come." Come on. Peter gets out of the boat and starts walking. But again, once all these tides, all this materialism, all these senses begin to overrun Peter, he loses the faith that he can overcome this and sinks. Now, this, I know that within Christian churches, sometimes they'll say, "Well, he took his eyes off Jesus. That's why he fell." It's not what it says here. It didn't say, Jesus says, "You fell because you took your eyes off me." He says, "You have little faith," right? Why did you doubt? Why did you doubt what? Why did you doubt that I'm the one that can make you walk on the water? Or why did you doubt you could? I'm not seeing that Jesus is saying you doubted me, right? He's saying, why did you doubt? Jesus didn't say, "If you call to me, you can walk on the water." That was Peter's idea. Jesus just obliged and said, "Come." So for me, within the Christian cosmology, right, there is the idea that a lot of this is an illusion. But what stops us is this fear. The fear of what we see and what we sense in the physical body. Any comments on what I just said?
That's certainly relevant to what we're going through right now.
Yes, I agree.
When he was focusing in self, well, or believing in himself, he he could negate any laws that was on this planet. Wow. You know, well, he was quite an example there, the Christ, to show us that, because one day we'll do this and more. But
Do you believe
wow,
it?
I know there's people who can do that. I'm just saying, you know.
Yeah, I think it's amazing how the message of Jesus gets so twisted and projected. You know, we always project onto our hero or savior,
Mhm.
but he was an embodiment of what we can do, and that's why he wasn't just some orb floating around telling people this stuff. He was a human, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And that's one reason I bring this up, is because Russell will, later in this part, speak about what he calls the Nazarene, which is, Jesus in his mind. He calls him the Nazarene. And so a lot of Russell's teachings are, Christian based, are God and Christ based. So that's why I wanted to bring this in a bit, because I think it did, as you said, really, and it came to me as I was doing it, that this was really a good example of kind of what we're talking about a little bit, about overcoming the physical sensations, overcoming the fear, overcoming that which we think we cannot do because we are living in our physical mind and we are living in fear. And we can overcome. We just actually have to spend some time developing that.
You can identify with the mind, is what it is. Thinking it's you.
Exactly. And that's what Walter Russell says it's not.
Yeah, it's definitely true. Fuck, sucks.
Question 4. What does Walter Russell say the earth and sky are? Now, this I found very interesting, because I've read this book before and I really didn't notice this, but he says that from page 96, father and mother. These are the two sex lights. Without them, there can be nothing upon the earth. So this is the male-female principle that we've talked about very much, the gravitational and the radiation, right, that we've talked about many times. These are his diagrams here, where he shows the father, mother, mother, father, so on, right? The equator in the middle. Positive, and this one he's showing both positive and positive, right? Father, mother, both being positive. But again, I think what the terms that were used was charge and discharge, right? Or gravitation and radiation. They are both positive, but they are opposite. And so again, we have the mother, father here, and we have this, spiraling light going into the equator, right? The mother, the father. Again, we have this diagram that I've showed in the past, the male, female, right? The blue, violet, the red, violet, right? Red, orange. This is similar, very similar to it's exactly the same, actually, just in a different format of the diagram I showed earlier with the notes and the gases and so on. This is how matter is born, and you see he has positive, positive. So it's not positive, negative, it's positive, positive. On the male side, we have the red. On the female side, we have the blue. Again, we call this the red shift, blue shift that we've talked about in the past also, right? We have male, we have female, and we have the equator right here in the middle.
But this matter it's creating is actually an illusion.
The matter it's creating is actually an illusion of color, of gases, and of tone.
Well, it's an illusion though, right? Isn't everything an illusion?
Everything's an illusion, correct. When we say it's
Why
illusion,
do all this work?
we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And I'm not God, but we can say what Russell is saying about it. The idea is that, again, it's an illusion because it's not permanent. right? It is transitory. It moves on. There is no permanence to this illusion that we're creating. It is real for a moment in what we see, but it does not stay. It is an illusion in that sense that it's gone. And as you see the colors, right? Just, I mean, a TV set, right? You're seeing a projection of color, what you're seeing. But if I was maybe somebody who'd never seen a TV, I'd look at it and think it was real. Think there was something really going on, right? I didn't know what a TV was. And that's the kind of the way that humans are. We don't understand that this is this cinema, projector that's being projected for us. It's a virtual reality. It's the same thing as me putting on a pair of virtual reality glasses and walking around thinking I'm in Camelot, right? Because I have some, King Arthur thing coming up on. I'm not. But it is a virtual reality that I am experiencing. Now, the difference is that the swords in the King Arthur virtual reality in my glasses is not going to kill me. In this 3D reality of matter and force and energy, it can. But again, that would be, is that my belief or is that my reality?
That's also not, that's just the body.
Yeah, well, and again, like I said, there's instances where you see, these enlightened, some movies where you see enlightened beings that don't believe it, the sword goes right through them also. They can walk through walls, right? There's stories of yogis that can put their hands through solid rock. Again, I don't know these things. I don't know if I ever want to try them, but that is really the base concept, is that this is all an illusion, and how free our mind is how free our being is. The more our mind is trapped, the more we become trapped in the physical plane. And as you talked about earlier, Doug, what happens to the beings that stay trapped? They go denser into matter. And those that aren't will go higher into non-matter, into a new existence. So, any questions on what Walter Russell calls father and mother, or what he says that earth and sky are? So this brought up the idea that in many Native American mythologies, Father Sky and Mother Earth, or Mother Corn, are important creative factors. And I really love this. I mean, I love the symbology, especially the one on the right, kind of, giving up to spirit. And what's kind of, disheartening is that we had this rich tradition in the U.S., and we came in and destroyed it all and said it was false, and went to a Christian-based system that actually got rid of a lot of the mother, right? We had Mother Mary, but she was, in my opinion, and again, this is my own, I didn't grow up in a Catholic church, but very inferior to the father, to where in the native cultures, they had equanimity. They were both required for creation. And it's just kind of strange that Walter Russell, within his cosmology, I don't know where he's, getting it from, but, he's mixing almost shamanism, right? This idea of Father Sky and Mother Earth within what he's conveying. Any comments on what I just said?
That's because he is a shaman.
The Christian shaman. Or I guess, I don't know if we can call him Christians because he has Christ. I don't know if we can call him Christian or not. Any other comments on Mother Earth and Father Sky? All right, we'll go on to the next question. Now we're on chapter 2. What's our time look like here? Okay, we're at 5:32. Seem to be doing pretty good. Got through in an hour. That's good, right? I guess. So chapter 2, Genesis. So basically in this chapter 2, he goes into a lot of Genesis and repeats a lot of the Bible. I didn't really cover a lot of that. And if there's any questions about Genesis, I know that pretty well. I can repeat that. But what I really dwelt on was some of his other concepts he has in here that deal with the main story and don't coincide directly with the text in the Bible. But these are questions that are out of the book. So what does Russell state the Father is, and where does he dwell? Well, he previously said that he was sky, the Father is sky, but now he says that the Father is light, which makes sense. The sky is light. He dwells in the kingdom of heaven, and it is without form and void. This struck me as a little odd. Because, again, if he is a Christian, right, Christian theology would say that heaven is not without form and void. Why would heaven be without form and void? In Russell's opinion, do you think?
Well, maybe he's thinking that the form that we think of in our 3G dimension, it does not have.
But why? Why wouldn't it have form? And why would it be void?
It's green screen.
What?
It went back to one. It went to the one, right? Everything is resolved. It's from the source.
Everything's
It's
magnetic.
no form. It's formless world.
It's number one, right? It's one thing. It has not yet separated into
Right.
the two sex lights, right? It is not separated in polarity. It is just one. It is formless and void. It is just the mind of God, right? It has to leave heaven, has to leave God, has to go in to matter, to become formed.
But he thinks, and there's electricity.
Exactly. Once the thought comes and it leaves heaven, leaves God, leaves the one, it becomes form. And that's what we help with. That's what humans help with. That's what beings help with. We create form.
Did you put the capital K and H kingdom? Was that written like that in the book?
Yeah, that was written like that in the book. I try to keep it as much as possible.
Every time things are spelled out like that, even in the books, like in the Divan Iliad or anything, it has a meaning. It works on you, like the kingdom of heaven, meaning the highest kingdom that you can imagine.
And even with light, where he capitalizes light. Sometimes he capitalizes light, sometimes he doesn't. When he refers to God as light, he will capitalize.
Okay. Right.
And so I think you have, and that's one reason I kind of do this the way I do, is that when I write it down and actually have to rewrite it, right, and look at it, because I make mistakes sometimes, as I'm sure you guys are aware, especially in spelling. You become very aware of what he's trying to convey with this punctuation and grammar. So and I pulled up these. I thought they were kind of cool because even though it's void, the Father is light. So that's not a dark void, right? It would have to be a light void if he is light.
Right.
The images are very cool too.
Yeah, I thought they were cool. So, any more on what Russell has about the kingdom of heaven? Okay, so again, what this kind of brought to my mind as I was doing this was, how does the concept of void and formless contrast with some of the current ideas of heaven? And so I kind of tried to bring up different images from different heavens. A lot of religions don't have heavens, and even in a lot of the Hebrew culture, the Jewish culture, the concept of heaven wasn't really grasped that much by a lot of the Pharisees or Sadducees. The Sadducees didn't really believe in a heaven, and the idea really became more coalesced after, I guess, the New Testament and Jesus talking about the kingdom of heaven and about the many palaces and many mansions and things like that. Again, whether or not that was quoted properly or interpreted properly is up for discussion. But, you know, if you look at this right on the upper left-hand corner, that's kind of the pearly gates, right? The pearly gates. And then, what's the passcode? You know, what'd you do, right? This is one of the Christians' ideas of heaven. You know, streets paved with gold. If you're good, you get in. If you don't, these things close on you. The one on the upper right is kind of the Muslim. You know, when I pulled up Muslim heaven, it's more of a garden idea. I could have pulled in some, put in the 50 Virgin, but they were too graphic for me to put on screen. You know, the one on the lower left is Ezekiel, and within the Bible, Ezekiel actually says he goes into heaven and sits in the throne of God, which is like this, you know, emerald or gym type of pool and lake and things with God in the center. So, you know, even though they say that the Hebrews didn't believe in heaven, it has different stories in the Old Testament. It has Job talks about going to heaven and Satan and God talking. It also talks about Ezekiel goes to heaven. I think that Isaiah goes into heaven. But whether or not that's the kingdom of heaven or just, you know, I don't know, because Jesus is really the only one who talked about the kingdom of heaven. The older testaments talked about heaven and the different levels of heaven, which could have been different levels of consciousness. I don't know. But so the lower right is Valhalla, right? Which is what's the Norse believed to be a heaven, where you'd go and fight every day and battle and die, and in the morning you wake up alive and drink some more and eat some more and go back to fighting again. And this continued forever, and on and on, and they were happy, and that was great. So there are many ideas of heaven, all differ from what Russell's saying, that it's formless and void. Any more comments on heaven or ideas of heaven or concept of heaven?
Well, didn't Jesus say that heaven was at hand?
Heaven said it's here. Jesus said it's here.
Yeah, it's here on earth if we will but make it go.
Mm-hmm. It's within you. Heaven is within you, basically. That's what he said.
But even that's an illusion, huh?
Well, again, within us is our consciousness, right? Our consciousness is not an illusion. What we see is an illusion.
Okay.
So our consciousness is real. What we see and what we experience is an illusion. But our consciousness with source is real. That's the only one thing that is real. Israel is real, and that we can go into to experience source. So number 3, what does the Father in heaven know? From page 98, his idea. So this gets back to the formless, right? The void and the form. He knows his idea. He knows it as one, the undivided one. So the one is undivided, the one is one knowing, the one is one idea. So we have God's knowing, God's idea. It has not become thinking yet. It's just an idea. It's just a concept. It's just a consciousness. And so here's this diagram that we have, that there is but one mind, one cosmic substance, and that one cosmic substance is mind. It's the mind of God. And then this one substance appears to be divided, into many substances. Into many substances as the elements of matter. And so we have the one universal substance, first divides, and so on and so forth. And then these 7 apparently different substances turn into matter. Right? These 7 are the nodes, these 7 are the gases, these 7 are the colors that we talk about. And then we get to matter. Are but different states of motion of the one substance. There are 7 tones of an octave, and there are 10 octaves of 7 tones. So here we talk about, says the granite rock may become gold or radium at the will of man. So I think I think Berlando even talks about the idea that we can actually create any substance we want through our knowing. That we can actually have control of manifestation. If this is true, right? If what Walter Russell's saying is true, then through our knowing, through our abilities of mind and consciousness, we can create anything we wish in the physical world. Now, can I do it? No. I mean, I do it. You do it every day, right? We do it every day because all of us are experiencing some reality. But are we experiencing a reality that it's limited by what we've been told and experienced already, and through ancestral DNA, and through programming, And is there another way to experience reality? Can we unlock the bondage of our consciousness to actually develop the ability to transmute? Or are we limited by what our beliefs are, that we have a view of the universe and ourselves, as we started with in the very beginning, that is limiting us in what we can create and experience?
Yeah. So this limitation that you're talking about is really just, and going back to what we were talking about at the first slide, was like the ego, or Wetiko, the inverted projection of ourselves, and it's really just the lens that we kind of get indoctrinated into seeing our lives through. And when we can just kind of step out of that lens, that like take that old overcoat off and hang it up and look through the eyes of innocence, or through a higher lens, like through these higher mind centers, I think we can start to touch it. Another observation is evolution and dissolution. Evolution's on the left.
Yes.
Is that because of clockwise motion?
Well, again, the wave travels in both directions, right? It travels both ways. It's bi-directional. We only see it in one direction because that's our reality. We don't see things, and this is what we talked about, I think, in time, space, and one of the other lectures that we talked about, all the other discussions we had. So the wave that we see is in the clockwise direction for now, but it does go in both directions, but we can't see in reverse in our current physical state. Now, once we get to higher levels of consciousness, we may be able to travel backward. But right now, in our current state, we can't do that, from what Russell said earlier. And that's where you get into time, right? Time moves forward. It's hard for us to go back in time physically. We can go back in time mentally, right? We can remember the activity, what we did, 4 years ago. Some of us, anyway, can do that. Some of us can. But as we move forward, that's how we visualize our world, from left to right, moving forward.
Is it related as well to do with day and night? The reason that we, when we sleep and the forces are acting on us when we sleep, which is why, my doctor says the best regeneration, if you like, is between 10 and 2 o'clock, for example.
Yes.
I'm thinking it's organized that when certain processes are happening, or we're not working with our mind at that point, like we're, you know what I mean, disconnected, because there must be a reason. Anyway, I was just thinking about that first part of the wave. The second, I'm just thinking as well, the way it's organized.
Mm-hmm.
If we're connected to the nature and the cycles out there, mm-hmm. then we're more aligned to that.
Mm-hmm. And within biogeometry, there's another reason, and we talked about it, I think, within the Mesmer video that we did. And this is where the concepts of flat Earth and spherical Earth come into play. And the idea within biogeometry that when you're on the back side of the earth at night, that the sun rays coming through, you're getting radiation kind of on the back side, on the front side. And on the back side, you're getting BG3 coming through because the light's going through the earth. And on the back side of the dark side, you're actually getting BG3, which is also helping you to regenerate. So and again, we're going to get into here next a little bit talking about the light. Because if the Father's light, where do we get night, right? Is the night bad? What is the darkness, right? What is that? Is it something? Because without the one torture is to keep the light on all night, right? You don't want the light all the time. You'll go insane. That's how they torture prisoners, by not allowing them. And if we didn't have night, we couldn't regenerate. So, does darkness have a purpose, right? Does darkness actually have a purpose in our lives? Well, it helps us to regenerate. I know that. So as we look at this, as Grant talked about the evolution and dissolution, evolution we can also call the concentrated desire. Again, he talks about desire. So this is where you want to concentrate. This is where, you want to become solid. This is concentration. This is the male side. Desire of mind to create the idea of many substances. Okay. And then we go to the female side, which is the dissolution, which is the disintegrative desire of mind to return that which it has created back to its source, into the one. So the male side wants to create, wants to make things happen, and the female side is more the spiritual side, right? It wants to take that and go back to source, to go back and experience the one. Two different purposes. Not saying that you have to be a man or a woman to have these things. I'm just saying that these are the male and female characteristics of the one mind. I'm not saying anything about gender. I'm not saying about your physical gender. Okay. I'm saying that these are the two concepts of mind. So let's get back to number 4. What divided the void in heaven and what proceeded after? From page 99, the one light divided the void and created 2 father-mother lights. The Father centered his sons, S-U-N-S, not S-O-N-S, as seeds of his desire and mighty polar breathing. You got earths, the coarse suns, far heavens to divide the day and night. Those of you remember this, right? So what it's saying here is that the light created 2 father-mother lights, right? Remember this diagram from part 1, which I created here. We have these 2 lights, right? At once there is just one light. Those lights create 2 lights, the sex light, the 2 sex lights. The magnetic pulse goes into the red-blue shift. Somebody has something in the background. Can you move? Maybe it's you, Doug. There you go. Thank you. So the 2 sex lights, which is the cause, God's imagining, God's imagining all forms, electric recording. Okay. So as they come out, they become electric. The magnetic becomes electric, becomes 2 poles, and it hits the red shift, blue shift, right? The red shift, blue shift combines with yellow, the centering point, and becomes a multi-universe, which then comes out, becomes electric wave, which then becomes our reality, the effect. So within this, not only is this, the process on earth, it is a process within heavens, within the universe, right? Once it proceeds from heaven, that the Father centered his sons as seeds of his desire and mighty polar breathing. And as we've talked about, the breathing is the mother-father concept. We're going to talk about that next. So what divided the void in heaven and what proceeded after? The one light divided the void and created 2. Any questions on that or comments? Okay, we're going to proceed on. Number 5. This is something that I found very interesting right here as I was doing my research. This is a Russell diagram from the Universal One. And it talks about nature's method of storing energy in mass. So what we have here is we have the integration, right? And what we end up with is a sphere, or elliptical sphere, of how nature stores energy, which I found very interesting, right? Because what we have here is this disintegration is what happens to a sphere as it reaches the end of its degenerative cycle, or its female cycle. And this is what we see in Saturn with its rings. And within the universe also, within the galaxies, because it has its rings that come out. So I found that kind of interesting. So I'd never seen this diagram before. Doug, you're muted. You want to say something? Okay. So our last question here. What is the light and how did God give it to man? From page 101 to 103. All knowing was in the light, and God gave knowing to man. So he dwelt with man to give him the light of all knowing, light of all knowing, as awakening man desired the light of all knowing. So, again, I don't know if this is true. I mean, there are those who would like to have all knowing, and there are those who just want to be ignorant, right? Ignorant is bliss. So I think there are some who want all knowing, who want to know source, who want to know the one. But I think there are others who don't. I think there are others who are happy to know the bare minimum and toil on in their life.
They're not human.
No. Any comments on that? Okay, so with that is
I have a quick comment.
okay.
It kind of gives me comfort knowing that they're not human, Doug, to be honest with you.
I agree. I mean, that's what Dorothy, that's what she really says that.
Well, and again, you know, and it depends on what your description of human is,
Well,
right?
they have no soul.
Well, and you get back to what I said is that what makes us distinctly human is our subtle bodies, right? The development of our subtle bodies. An animal has a physical body. It doesn't have all the different levels of bodies that we have. So you're a human animal. You're not a human ascended being. You're not a human being. You're a human animal. Because to be a human being, you have to actually have subtle bodies and have the development of the subtle bodies. Any more comments? So hopefully this was enlightening. Hopefully people enjoyed this one. Changed it up a bit. You know, I put the questions on the slides. I think it moved faster. It was a little bit better than going back and forth. Next week we will be doing, I think it's 3 and 4, chapters 3 and 4. We'll be discussing those. I know that we'll be doing some other work also. I know Grant wants to do a discussion with he and I on Wetiko. So I'm calling him out to get that together so we can actually have that discussion and talk a little bit about how that may be affecting our world today. So for now, I'm going to stop the recording and we can discuss a little bit more after the recording stops.